Hello friends, my name is AJ and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to load data from a JSON file in your app in Swift on Xcode 11 for iOS development. I will add timestamps in a pinned comment below in case you need to skip to one specific part. Without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to open up Xcode and create a new single view application, just as I do here. And I can just call this load from JSON, as that is what we are going to be doing today. And I'll just save it to my desktop. Now, if you want to load JSON into your project, into your app, then you actually need JSON to load. You need some sort of JSON file. In this case, I have a file right here, mydata.json, and it basically has customer data. So you can see here that this is just an array of these customer objects. And all of these objects have a customer ID, customer name, customer type, age, and units sold. So I'm simply going to click and drag from the JSON file into the project. I'm going to just drag it into the project directory here. And I want to make sure that copy items if needed is checked, as well as the target of the main app, which should be the first line, should be checked. So I'm just going to click finish. And after that, you can see that the JSON file has been added to my project. And that is the first step to actually take the data and use it inside of an app. Now, the second thing that we need to do is we need to create some sort of data structure. And this data structure is actually going to represent each of our items for our JSON. So to do that, you can right-click on the project folder and click New File. This will be a Swift file, and you can just name this as what you want to name your data structure. I'm just going to call this user data. So I'll save it as user data, just like that. Now, in order to create a data structure, I'm just going to use struct, the keyword struct, and that creates a data structure. And then the name that I want for my data structure is going to be user data. User data. Now, the key thing here is that you want to make your data structure inherit from the Codable type. So use :codable. And basically what this allows you to do is it allows you to represent the structure as JSON and vice versa. Basically, you should be able to take a JSON object and then convert it into this type, this data structure type, named user data or whatever you named it. So you can use Codable and then curly braces just like that. And so now, how do I represent these different points? I have 5 different fields or data points in each of my structures here, or each of these objects. And so the first one is customer ID. And we know that just by looking at the customer ID, over here, this is going to be an integer type. You can see there's an integer here, an integer here. It's an integer for all of my types. And so basically, how do I represent that inside of my structure? Well, to do that, I'm going to create a variable to represent my customer ID. So I'm going to type var to create a variable, and then the name that I make my variable is going to be the exact name as the key in my object. So this is customer ID. So I'm going to use that exact thing, customer ID, as this exact key as the name of my variable here. And basically I'm going to use colon, and by using the colon, I can now specify the type that it's going to be. And by looking, we know that this is going to be an integer type, so I can type int here. And so now we've represented the customer ID. Now the next key is the customer name. And you can see that for all of these, the customer name is going to be a string type. So I'm going to use, again, the exact same key and create a variable named customer name, and I'm going to specify the type of that as a string type. Now I can look at my next item, which is customer type, and I can represent that also in my structure using var, then name, and then the type. In this case, my type is a string type. Now the next two are going to be integer types. I have age, so var age, And the next one at the end is going to be the units sold. So I can simply use var units sold, and that will be my integer. So just like that, I've created my data structure that's going to represent each object inside of my JSON here. Now the next thing I need to do is to actually create a loader, a way to load the data from my JSON file and basically turn it into my user data structures here. And so to do that, I'm going to create a class. I'm going to right click on the main project directory here and create another new file. And the new file that I'm going to create is just going to be called data loader, just like that. Now inside of here, I need to create a class that loads my data. So I'm going to use the public class, and public basically allows me to access then this class from any of my files, and I will call this data loader, just like that. And I'm going to have my curly braces open. Now I want to create a variable or a field inside of my class, and the field that I want to create will store all of the user data that I retrieve from the JSON file. And so I can use the var keyword to create a variable. I will name this user data and set it equal to an array of user data objects, as that is what my variable is going to hold. And I can add a constructor here, just like that at the end. And then because this is going to be a field that stores data, there's a very cool almost tag you can add before this called publish. You can do @published. And what that allows you to do, it basically allows the variable to be updated in a more efficient and better way for getting data, or kind of using data of this way, getting it from an external source, and it is very powerful. So the @published is quite useful. It's not required for what we're doing, but it is useful. You might as well use it in this case. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to create a function to actually load our data. So I can use func load to create a function that loads my data. It doesn't have to have any parameters, and I will create using with curly braces here to create my function. Now, I need to basically access or get the file location of my JSON file, which is inside of my directory here. And so the best way to do that is using the if-let. So if you remember, what the if-let does is if it can successfully create and unwrap the variable, it will then run the code inside of the body. And otherwise, it ignores it. So basically, this is very useful in case something happens, your file is missing, something isn't working right, then it will just skip over it. And that's very useful in preventing crashing and bugs and all of those things. So I will say if let file location, and then I want to set this equal to something. I want to find a URL for this particular resource. And so to do that, I need to access the bundle. And basically, bundle refers to, as you can see here, a representation of the code and resources stored in the bundle directory. It basically refers to everything inside of my folder here. This is my bundle. And then because I want a file inside of the main bundle, you can do .main. And then I want to get the URL for a resource. So you can see this particular item right here, URL for resource string with extension string. Double click on that. And the resource that we actually want is my data. So I can create a string and put my data here. And now the extension is going to be after the dot. So you see here, this is my data.json. My extension is going to be JSON, just like that. And because this is an if-let, remember you have to have a body. And so this is going to be with these curly braces. So if this file location is able to be created successfully, then everything in here runs. And so now what we want to do is we actually want to add a do catch. And the reason we want to add a do catch, so do catch, and we want to create this do catch in case of an error. It basically handles our errors in case there is one. So we will add do here, and then a catch statement. And inside of the catch, we can print our error, just like that. And now the error is actually created. If you're confused of where the error comes from, the error actually comes from this catch right here. When we add this catch keyword, it creates an error in case, basically describing the error that occurred inside of the do, and then can print that out. So now what do we do inside of our do statement here? Well, the first thing we want is we want to try to get the data or the contents out of the mydata.json file. So to do that, we can say let data, and this is going to equal a data object type. So open parentheses, and then you'll see down here that there is contents of. And basically the parameter we use here is of a URL, or to a file location, which we created up here. And you can also see the keyword throws. Basically what that means is if you have the throws when you are creating something, that means that it could potentially throw an error. And that is why it is inside of a do catch here. And so basically when you have the throws there, you have to add the keyword try before the statement. So basically what it's doing is it's doing all the code in here. It's trying this, if basically hoping it works. If it doesn't work, it will go to this catch statement and print the error associated with it. So we're going to do try data, and then the contents of is going to be the URL or the file location, which we created up here in this variable. So the contents of will be file location. Now the next thing we need is we have this data. We can see all the stuff that's inside of this JSON. However, we need to make sense of this. We need to convert it into something that we understand, and we need to basically map this to our data structure here. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create something that can decode our JSON. And simply you can say let JSON decoder equals JSON decoder. And this is an object that comes in already with the basic Swift. We don't have to add anything to it. And this allows us to actually decode instances of a data type from JSON objects. So this allows us to take our data and actually decode it and to turn it into objects that we defined. And so we're going to create a JSON decoder and then just have a open and close parentheses just like that. Now we want to actually get our data from we want to get the JSON, we want to get the data from the JSON file using this JSON decoder. So we can say let data from JSON equals JSON decoder dot decode. So now we're doing dot decode, and this will actually take our JSON and convert it into the type that we say we want it to be. And you can also see here that there is this keyword throws. So again, we have to add the keyword try in front. And so now what are we trying to decode? We're trying to decode what from what. We're trying to decode the user data, because user data is what we've defined as our structure here. But now if you look at our JSON file, you'll notice that we have multiple user data. We have 5, in fact, user data objects. And if you're in a slightly more, obviously bigger project, you're likely to have more JSON objects instead of just 5. But in this case, I have 5 individual separate user data .swift or user data structures here, which is inside of the user data.swift. So when we're actually decoding our data, we don't just want one single user data. We want an array of user data, because if you see here, there are multiple user data. So we need to get an array of all of them. So to do that, we simply can use brackets to create an array and then put user data. And this here refers to a array of user data. And now the last thing is we have to add the .self. And you can see here this is user data.type. So now this refers to the type. We want to decode an array of user data, but we don't want to create an array. So that's why we have this .self here. And then what do we want to decode from? Well, we want to decode from the data that we got from our file right here. So from data, we simply can use data. And so now this creates an array of user data objects from the data object right here and from our JSON. So we can now set this to our array up here, the user data array, simply by doing self.userdata equals and then data from JSON. You can see that these types match up here, just like that. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually run this load function when my data loader class is initialized or when it is created. So basically we want to load the data right when the data loader is created. And so to do that, you have to use the init or the initialized function. And so we'll have no parameters, and then the statement, we simply run load. What this means is that when I create my data loader object, it's going to immediately load the data for me. I don't have to physically call the load function. Once I create it, it loads it, it is ready. Now the last thing I want to do in my data loader class is create a sort function. So I have my load and then I want a sort. So underneath my load function, I can say func sort, just like that, and with curly braces create a new function. Now what I want to do is I want to take my user data and then sort it. And so to do that, I can say self.userdata, and basically I want to set user data with the sorted version of itself. So I say let user data equals self.userdata and then dot sorted. And what this does is it returns the array of user datas, but in a specific sorted sequence that we say. So we can just do that here, and then it says by. And now you have this right here, and you can ignore the what's here, and you want to add curly braces. And so you do $0 to access the one item of the array, and then .customer ID, which is the what we're sorting by. We're going to be sorting our objects by the customer ID integer field, and we're going to say customer ID less than $1.customer ID. Now this is obviously confusing. You may have no idea what this is doing, what this is talking about, but basically in very basic terms, you're taking the first item of the user data and it needs to be less than the next item. So that's sorting it in ascending sequence. So you're starting at the smallest, and that's going to be less than the next, and then less than the next, and then less than the next. So what this is sorting is it's sorting in ascending sequence from 0 to the highest number, or from the lowest number to the highest number. And it's going to be sorting it by the customer ID field here. Now, if you want to sort it in descending, you would simply switch the sign. But for now, I'm just going to do it in ascending. I kind of wish that there was a slightly better or slightly easier way to do this than using the $0 and $1, but this is what we have to work with for now. So that is how to sort it in ascending sequence. And now I want to make sure that my sort is run when I load my data and when my thing is created. So I'm just going to add sort right here in my init. So basically when I create my data loader, it's going to immediately load the data and sort the data, and basically it'll be ready right there for me to use. Now what I'm going to do is I've created all of the necessary things. I've created my data data structure for the data that I'm going to be pulling out in my JSON file, and then I've created a class that actually loads my data and stores it in the user data field. So now I can go to my viewController.swift and actually load my data. Or you can go into any of your pages and load your data. So to load my data, I'm just going to say let data equals and then data loader. And all I have to do is have open and close parentheses. And the open and close parentheses actually runs the constructor or the init function. So this right here, when you actually do this, and you did this up here too, you used open and close parentheses, and here open and close parentheses in a JSON decoder, that's actually calling its init function. So when I over here said data loader and then open close parentheses, that's going to be running my init function right here, and it's going to load and sort my data. So now my data, I have data loader, and then I simply have to do dot user data. and this loads all of the data and returns in this data variable all of the data that I got from the JSON file. So I can print my data using print and then data. And this, when I run it, should print all of the data from the mydata.json or print all of the data in an array. So I'm going to run this here on the iPhone 11 simulator, and it should print to my log, but it may take some time for the simulator to turn on. And you can see right here that it prints the array of all of my data. I have the customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, customer 4, and customer 5 in sorted order. So just like that, that is taking the data from the my.json file and creating an array based on the data structure that we defined in our userdata.swift file. Now, the next part of this video is a very short part. I'm actually going to take this and apply it. I'm going to load my data into a table view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here and click on new file. And then under my Cocoa Touch class, I can create a new table view controller. I'll just call this data view controller. And it's going to be a subclass of the UI table view controller. So next, and I'll just save that right here. So now this creates a table view controller.swift file. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete number of sections, as I'm only going to have one section. And now I have number of rows in section. So I need to basically tell my view controller how many rows of data I'm going to have. And so to do that, I actually need to load my data. So outside of my viewDidLoad function, I'm going to say let data equals data loader. And again, all you have to do is just data loader, open and close parentheses, and that runs the load and sort functions that we defined, and then dot user data. So I want to return basically the number of rows that I have is going to be the number of items inside of my data array. So you can see here I have data, and then I can just do data.count. And that's going to return the number of items inside of my array, just like that. Now what I need to do is I actually need to populate that cell with something. So that's going to be this commented out function right here, this cell for row at index path. So I'm going to remove the comment, and I can now edit this right here. So I have cell and then table view.dequeue reusable cell. I'll just set my identifier to cell. And so now what I need to do is actually need to hook this up to my storyboard. So I'm going to go to my main.storyboard, and then instead of this view controller, I'm going to add in a table view controller. So I'll just click and drag this table view controller right in there. And then I can move my arrow, and this arrow basically refers to the initial view controller of this storyboard. I'm just going to move this over to my table view so that it shows my table view when I start my app. And then under here, you click on your table view cell, and under identifier, you can set this to cell. So basically, this identifier here and the identifier in your code should be the same thing. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So make sure they are the exact same things. Now what I'm going to do is in my main.storyboard, I'm just going to click on up here, the table view controller, go to the identity inspector, which is the box kind of icon right here, and then under class, set the class to a data table view controller. And that basically is going to connect this right here and my code. And so now the last thing I want to do is inside of my cell for an index path, I want my cell's the title or the text inside of my cell to be equal to, let's just say the customer name. So to do that, you can do cell.textLabel.text, and that allows you to set the text of the text label to something equal to, and then here you can use data, our data array right here. And the data array, our data array is going to, we want a specific item, and the item we want is going to be dependent on the row that it is. So this will just be inside of brackets to access one specific element of our data variable, you can simply do index path dot row, and that selects the item inside of this array based on the row for our table view. And then what we actually want is we want dot customer name. We want the customer name to be set to the text of our cell. All right, so let's also just follow the instructions in our error. We probably have to add in a question mark there. And now we can run our project onto our iPhone 11 simulator, and you can see just like that, there is a table view and all 5 of our customers and their names are in our table. Just like that, using this cell for row at index path function. All right, so that is how to load JSON data into your app as well as putting it in a table view. All of the code in this video will be on my GitHub page in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more content, and as always, thanks for watching.